Ja, hej på er. Glad att se att ni har hittat. En av mina största oroar här inför konferensen var om folk skulle hitta ända bort till det här rummet som var så långt ifrån huvudsalen här. Men det ser ut som att många har hittat hit i alla fall. Till session 2 då, där vi har 3 väldigt intressanta presentationer. Benjamin Schwarz från det danska Institutet för mänskliga rättigheter. Och så kommer vi också få lyssna på Julia Caligari från Mälardalens universitet och Mikael Lundholm från Mittuniversitetet. Så här har vi en stor spridning även internationellt då, med spännande presentationer på temat interventioner och mötet med det offentliga. Så jag tänker inte säga mer än så, utan I would like to welcome Benjamin Schwarz. Up to the podium, please.
Okay, so my name is Benjamin. I'm gonna talk to you in English, I'm afraid. I'm not so proficient in Swedish. It's a little embarrassing, but that's just how it's gonna go. And if you have questions for me in the end, then please also do it in English. And before starting on my presentation on debt counseling, I just want to say that I'm currently doing a postdoc on, which is very new. It's on partnerships between the state and big tech in relationship to welfare services. So it's quite different. So, and also just to say, just wanted to add that this research I'm going to talk to you about today is a couple of years old. Hopefully it's still the analytical points are still relevant, but it is a few years old. So the agenda is, as you can see, first I'm going to talk to you about the PhD project. What's the governing idea behind it, and what sort of material, just so you know what my takes are based on. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about debt counseling in Denmark, because it's a little different institutional setup, I think, than in the Swedish case. And then I'm going to do a critical interpretation or critical reading of some of the practices and logics in debt counseling. And the intent, it is going to be quite like one-sided, quite critical, and the intent is to cause awareness and reflection, I think, amongst debt counselors regarding what might seem, or what is often like well-intentioned efforts supposed to help people that sometimes might end up hurting vulnerable people with the problem debt. So that's the overline, the overarching theme. And then in the end, you can I just have a page where you can find more information regarding my previous and future research. Okay. Let's just gonna do like this. Okay, so my research was on Danes and their encounters, like people with problem debt, or who are debt-ridden, who cannot pay their debts, and their engagement or encounters with different institutions, mainly state institutions. So debt advisors and debt enforcement, debt relief, and so forth. And the idea, the underlying idea was that different moments in their experiences with debt were especially mediated by a particular segment of the system. So initial like crisis experiences were often mediated by encountering debt collection or debt recovery, while efforts of sometimes trying to escape problem debt were often mediated by, or were regulated at any rate by, debt relief or debt adjustment regulation. So my idea was that this journey through the system was an effort to make people able to manage their finances and their relationships around their finances, what I called debt worthiness. So instead of like credit worthiness, you are becoming worthy in your management, your everyday management of debt. And the PhD was based mainly on observations and interviews. I'm just going to go quickly over this, but you see like an outline of the empirical material here. And just a small thing, I also did a master's thesis specifically on debt counseling. So there is some additional empirical material on debt counseling that I've not really accounted for in this outline. Okay, so now to some differences between the Danish system and, I've just said in Nordic countries, but I think it also relates to Sweden or the Swedish system. So debt counseling in Denmark is not a public obligation. That's very clearly stated. It used to be provisionally or project-based financed, but since I think 2022, it's been financed on a permanent basis. And the advice is not carried out by professionals, rather it's carried out mostly by volunteers. So bank advisors and legal professionals and social workers. So it's not civil servants, it's volunteers. And of course that has certain benefits, but also certain drawbacks. And the second thing is that, to my knowledge, there's a difference in, like, you can actually maybe in a Swedish context talk about an actual system in the sense that different functions are integrated institutionally. Correct me if I'm wrong, but debt counseling is not institutionally or functionally coupled to debt relief or debt enforcement. So it's each their own institution, so to say. Yes. And the third thing is that the success rate for debt relief, for getting debt relief or debt adjustment in Denmark, at least at some point, was quite a lot lower than in the rest of the Nordic countries. I'm not sure that that's still the case, is in the light of there's been some European harmonization in relationship to debt relief legislation. So I'm not sure how that has affected. That was after I finished the PhD, so I'm not sure about that. But the main point is that when you compare Denmark to the rest of Scandinavia, Denmark seems to lag behind in relationship to the political emphasis on debt problems, but also in relationship to the legal protections of debtors. Yes. So if you look at, there's been like quite some few evaluations of debt counseling in Denmark, and basically what you get from reading those is that they're working quite well, and they are like that. That's also my impression from talking to people who are clients of debt counseling, or who are going to debt counseling. And there are different. You can see I've on the page I've mentioned some of the different things that debt counselors help these clients with, like lessening the mental load, and giving them an overview of their financial situation. But what I want to stress here today is that is like the different tensions and ambivalences in that are also present, I think, in debt counseling, that maybe are not so expressed in these evaluations, or that people are maybe not so comfortable in expressing towards their debt counselors. And the main points that I want to stress are the following: that debt counselors tend to exaggerate the power of debt collectors, which pressures some clients into finding ways of repaying, which also means lowering their material conditions or quality of life. That's one point. The second point is that debt counselors sometimes fail to see these consequences, what this means for their clients, what it means to actually manage or try to escape problem debt. And the third point is that debt counselors sometimes exaggerate their ability to actually provide clients with a debt-free experience or a debt-free existence, and also stress and trouble-free existence that comes with problem debt. So these are the 3 points. How am I on time? Okay. Is it 12 past 1? Is that the same as? Yeah. Okay, that's good. So just to state this very briefly, my impression is that when people are engaging with debt collectors and debt enforcement, often their abilities to pay is quite strained, and that compels, I would say, debt counselors to stress their moral duty to repay. That they have, that it's not just a legal question or a financial question, but it's a moral question. And one of the main tasks of debt counselors is trying to demoralize this question of repayment. And they do this in various ways. For instance, many people talk about they have this black cloud hanging over them, or they feel very burdened. And what some debt counselors try to do is to identify each different debt item, say, okay, this is the exact amount you owe, and this is the limitation period, and this can or cannot be enforced, and so forth. So really trying to turn this black cloud of moral inferiority into something that you can actually see and update and do something about. So there's a certain therapeutic quality, I would say, to debt counseling, even though perhaps debt counselors tend to say that real debt counseling is very much about the legal aspects and the financial aspects, and not so much the therapeutic. You have to get that out of the way. But to me, it seems like a constant component of debt advice. And so they're trying to combat this moralizing power of debt. That's the point. And so this way of looking at debt from a more rational or instrumental point of view, I think that it has, of course, benefits, but also certain drawbacks. And the drawback can be maybe more seen more clearly if we look at, so at some point, usually debt counselors start to introduce a budget template. And in this budget template, it's not only the description of their clients' financial incomings and outgoings, but there's also a prescription. So you have certain fixed expenses, you have certain a disposal amount, you have if you have special needs, all these things, these clients' financial lives have to yield to. They have to reorder into this budget template. And so at one point, this budget template constrains the consequences of default, because it says, but you can't really go lower than this particular level. On the other hand, it enforces financial scarcity by saying, if you have more money than this, then you sort of have to pay. There is an underlying logic, I think, in debt counseling, that you have to pay if you can pay, if you can legally pay. They cannot legally they feel legally obligated to be truthful about their client's financial state. And that means legally they are able to pay. But the issue that I see is that sometimes debt counselors pressure people into paying, in the sense that they say, okay, you have this surplus amount, and if you don't pay that surplus amount, or if you don't negotiate to make it more beneficial for you, in the sense that you don't have to pay the full amount, but maybe some of it, then these debt collectors are gonna figure out your true ability to pay, and they're going to enforce it, basically. And the issue with this is that, at least in a Danish context, and this might not be the same for the Swedish context, is that private creditors do not actually, or private collectors do not actually have this knowledge of their true, or like real, legally speaking, ability to pay. So they are, in a way, like inadvertently, I would say, strengthening or reinforcing the powers and the capacities of debt collectors, exaggerating their powers by saying that they actually have this knowledge when they actually don't. And they don't, and they cannot garnish the payments, so they cannot withhold payments in the sense of deducting a portion of income from debtors based on because they don't have this actual calculation of ability to pay. Does that make any sense? So in this sense, they inadvertently ends up strengthening some of the power of debt collectors and reinforcing maybe this experience of scarcity. So that's the first point. The second point is that, as I said, there is like a real therapeutic, I think, component to debt counseling. And there is a real acknowledgement that having debt issues also affect one's familial life, one's social relationships. They can strain all these different types of relationships. And there is also like, they encourage people not just to unburden themselves, which is a word I find like illuminating, unburdening, not just unburdening themselves to counselors, but also they're encouraged to tell the truth to their friends and family. So and again, to break this taboo of having debt problems. And so on the one hand, this is my point, they acknowledge very much the social relationships that are entangled with problem debt. And if we return to this budget template, it's also part of the budget template to that if you're part of a household, then there are different, like your ability to pay, for instance, is calculated in relationship to your family or household composition. So it is acknowledged. At the same time, I find that advisors tend to overlook how making financial changes affect their close relationships, and so overlook this, but maybe also how to say this? They also and overlook, they overlook these sort of sacrifices that they have to make, and maybe not reflect on how extreme some of these measures that they indirectly propose. And I have quite a lengthy quote from an article. Maybe I don't have time to read. I don't think I have time to read it. The main idea is that this Mike character, who's a client of a debt counseling agency, he is told to, even though his partner is doesn't really want to move in with him at this point because he has financial issues, he's sort of pressured into finding a more stable financial situation, which means moving in with her, and which means making a budget account with her, and which also entails cutting down on his material conditions and so forth. But these like really radical changes is just like, that's just imperative. That's just something you have to do. And at the same time, I find that clients who are not really willing or able to make these changes are sometimes like problematized, and sometimes in a more like pathological way, in that they are hiding or fleeing the real issues, and they are not really taking responsibility for their case or for their lives. And this notion of responsibility or control and so forth, the issue with these sort of notions is that they are already feel like this is a moral fault of theirs. And when they are encountering debt collectors, they are stressing that it really is a moral fault of theirs. So saying those sort of words can really echo those sort of statements. They can ignite this sense that they are not good enough as human beings, basically. So just to summarize this point is that debt counselors tend to ignore the personal consequences of debt management and problematize clients who are unable to commit to like these very radical, I think, life changes. The final point I want to make is that, and again, much of this goes for the Danish system, I can't really speak to the Swedish system, is that many clients perhaps are actually cannot really, debt counselors in many cases cannot really change the financial circumstances of many of their clients. Perhaps there's not really, you can only find guesstimates, and I've only got guesstimates from interviewees and from evaluations. That's not really anything that's been probably explored or studied. So you can only guess at how many people this is. And the reason why is that if you are to get debt relief or debt adjustment, then you need to be at a certain financial level. That means that you won't incur debts. That means you won't be in this situation or position that you cannot pay a bill, or you don't have to go out to prevent this situation by taking on a credit. So you need to be like permanently, as far as you can see, in a good enough financial situation that you won't incur new debts. So basically you cannot be too poor to get debt relief, which is sort of a paradox in a way. And so for many cases, and that's also something if you start to go into the research, especially in the UK, you can find that many debt counselors are frustrated with the fact that they cannot really help a lot of or they can help to a certain extent the client base. As I said, there is an evaluation that I've quoted here from 2011 that says that they cannot carry out fundamental change in the long term for many clients, so they have to learn to live with debt as a condition of life, which means they cannot really achieve their ultimate goal, which is to help people escape problem debt. And what they do is that what they instead do is that they want to teach people how to become quote unquote happy debtors, which means, to my estimate, that they can live like joyous, peaceful lives without constantly thinking about problem debt, without feeling morally inferior and so forth. So they can, they are still indebted, but they don't feel the consequences, so to say. And which goes back to this therapeutic component of debt counseling. And so my point is that they're not really like solving problem debt. Often they're not really solving problem debt as a financial phenomenon, but they're like solving problem debt like in here or in here. And that becomes the end goal. And in this sense, and that's not really a critique of debt counselors, but more like the capacities invested in debt counseling, or the legal basis of debt counseling, or the legal constrictions of debt counseling, is that they might exaggerate. At one hand, they cannot really help so many people. On the other hand, they might exaggerate what they actually can do for people, because, as I said in the beginning, they're still going to be engaging with debt collectors who are still going to reignite their sense of moral crisis. So this notion that they are just going to be happy debtors doesn't really, to me, make so much sense when they're still going to be confronted with people who are pulling in a different direction. And they're still going to be confronted with family members and friends and neighbors who possibly maybe do not have this rational, legalistic sense of problem debt. So the notion that they can just turn people, or eventually turn people into happy debtors, is I'm not so sure about it. Yes, I think that's all for me. You can find more information about my previous research and my coming research. Hopefully, I think at some point there's going to be, I recently have an article out which is both about debt advice and debt relief, but I'm going to hopefully soon finish up an article on that specifically touches on debt advice. So that's it for me. Thank you.